Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Monday morning, June the 6th. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and we're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and the chat room is open, and I popped the link in there to what I want to talk about here today. Friday, we left off on Robert Burney's webpage, is called Joy to You and Me, and talking about codependency still. Quite a lot of material there, and he's got some good information there, and what is codependency, and codependency defined, and codependency versus interdependence, and that's what we were talking about Friday and last week. And this week I wanted to take a look at codependency. It's the actual title is Codependence as Delayed Stress Syndrome, and that's from www.joy2meu.com/codependency.htm, and it's Joy, Joy, the number 2, and then MEU.com. That's Robert Burney's web pages, Joy to You and Me. You can also find it on healing.about.com. If you type in www.healing.about.com, you can find Robert Burney's web pages there as well. And he's got some awesome stuff here. He's an author. He's a codependence therapist and grief therapist, and he's a survivor himself. And he's written a book called Codependence: The Dance of Wounded Souls, and by Robert Burney, and he's got some great information here. And I just sort of stumbled across his web pages on about.com, and then found his website through there. And so hopefully people are getting something out of this. I know that I am, and it's always good for me to look at codependency and all the stuff about inner child work and whatnot, because that's sort of what I'm working on now. Is recognizing some of my own behaviors as an adult survivor of child abuse and dysfunctional upbringing. Trying to look at some of my behaviors and change some of the belief systems, and still working on that, and definitely still working on trying to get hold of and trying to learn how to work with my inner child and stuff like that. So hopefully it's helpful for other people. So I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm just a private citizen paying these shows here on Blog Talk Radio. I just wanted to be another voice out here speaking out about abuse, and another voice, standing up for child rights, as well as to do this show, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, which is my healing journey, really. And I just wanted to reach out to other survivors of abuse and to let them know that they're not alone, and that there is help out there, and we have to make sure that we allow ourselves to get that help. So I just want to be another voice of encouragement for people. So that's why I'm doing these shows. So you have to listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about abuse, and I say this on every show because it's so important that people know that I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm just a private person doing these shows. And and I'm also talking about abuse, and abuse is a very sensitive subject, and I don't sugarcoat it and just minimize it and all this other stuff. I just tell it like it is, and it can be quite disturbing. I think for people who haven't heard a whole lot about it, it can be quite a disturbing topic if you don't know a whole lot about it. It's a disturbing thing, abuse, and so you have to know what's good for you to listen to, and know what you're comfortable listening to. If you think the show might bother you, topics of abuse and violence and sexual violence and everything else, then you need to turn it off, right? I mean, it is your discretion, so you listen at your own discretion. Young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, because young people deserve to be protected at all times. And, my shows have a lot of mature content on them, and they're not necessarily for younger children, and obviously it's about stopping child abuse, but you need to have an adult listen to the show with you so they can help you decide whether it's okay for you to listen, age appropriately, right? So we'll get right into this morning. So thanks for being here, and I appreciate everybody who's taking the time to listen to my shows. I almost have 30,000 shows listened to, and, that's a lot of shows. I appreciate it. I've done about 700 shows. So a lot of people are listening, and I don't know who you are, but I do appreciate you taking the time to do that, because it is a lot of work to keep up with my shows, and it's a lot of work for me to keep up with them myself. Lately I've had to kind of cancel most of my evening shows, if not all, because my sweetheart is living with me now. We had to move in with me, and last month, like May, was just a busy month trying to get. He was in the hospital for 2.5 weeks, and he was very, very ill for about a month, and he's doing really well. He's come around, he's doing quite well, and so that's good. But he really can't be on his own anymore, and so he had to move in with me. So I had to close his apartment down, and I had so much work to do. So I did have to cancel my evening shows, as well as the Dreamcatchers shows. So the Dreamcatchers for Abused Children has a talk show here on Blog Talk Radio at www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. And I was doing that show as well Monday through Friday, but the team has taken that show over, and that's Star and Trina and Donna and Elizabeth, and they've taken over the shows for me so I don't have to do those shows, and I was very thankful and happy to have them come on board. I mean, they were already sort of on board anyway, and so it's great to have them do that for me because it really has freed up my time to just get some rest because I was exhausted. So I'm just doing mainly my morning shows right now. So that's Monday to Friday. This show here at 6 o'clock in the morning, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. So I'll be back to my regular schedule. I'd like to say July because I really would like to get back into doing some of my evening shows as well as some of the Dreamcatcher shows. So, thanks everybody for hanging in here with me. I really appreciate it. So this is from Joy to You and Me, www.joytomeu.com/codependency.htm. This is codependence as delayed stress syndrome. And Robert Burney says here, in a war, soldiers are forced to deny their emotions in order to survive. And the emotional denial works to help the soldier survive the war, but later can have devastating delayed consequences. And the medical profession has now recognized the trauma and damage that this emotional denial can cause and have coined a term to describe the effects of this type of denial. And that term is delayed stress syndrome. So this is what Robert Burney says. He says, in a war, soldiers have to deny what it feels like to see friends killed and maimed, what it feels like to kill other human beings and have them attempting to kill you. There is trauma caused by the events themselves. There is trauma due to the necessity of denying the emotional impact of the events. And there is trauma from the effects the emotional denial has on a person's life after he or she has returned from the war, because as long as the person is denying his or her emotional trauma, he or he is denying a part of themselves, right? So the stress caused by the trauma and the effect of denying the trauma by denying self eventually surfaces in ways which produces new trauma: anxiety, alcohol and drug abuse, nightmares, uncontrollable rage, inability to maintain relationships, inability to hold jobs, suicide, etc. So codependence is a form of delayed stress syndrome, he says. So this is really quite interesting, and I think it so much does relate to people who have survived abuse of any type, right? I mean, it's the same. It's like being in a war, being attacked and being, whether it doesn't even have to be physically attacked. I mean, being emotionally attacked, being verbally attacked, being psychologically attacked. Is having your life threatened. And many children, I know my life was threatened as a child, and it's a scary thing, and many children, whose lives are threatened, it's like being in a war, right? And of course, children are helpless, right? They can't really defend themselves. They have no way to defend themselves. So he says here, codependence is a form of delayed stress syndrome. Instead of a blood and death, although some do experience blood and death literally, what happened to us as children was spiritual death and emotional maiming, mental torture, and physical violation. And he says we were forced to grow up denying the reality of what was happening in our homes. We were forced to deny our feelings about what we were experiencing and seeing and sensing, and we were forced to deny ourselves. It was really quite interesting. He says we grew up having to deny the emotional reality of parental alcoholism, addiction, mental illness, rage, violence, depression, abandonment, betrayal, deprivation, neglect, incest, etc., of our parents fighting or the underlying tension and anger because they weren't being honest enough to fight, of dads ignoring us because of his workaholism and or mom smothering us because she had no other identity than being a mother, of the abuse that one parent heaped on another who wouldn't defend him or herself, or the abuse we received from one of our parents while the other wouldn't defend us, of having only one parent or having two parents who stayed together and shouldn't have, etc., etc. So what he says here is pretty, what a lot of us have gone through, and that's just it, with growing up having to deny the emotional reality of all of this stuff, you know what I mean? And I look back, at my own childhood and just remember the mess and whatnot, and just to get through it is in order to survive in that environment and in order to try to remain sane, any type of sanity, basically had to just say, okay, I can do this. I can roll with the punches. I like whatever they're dishing out. And I can not deal with it. I can push it down. And so, by the age of 12, I started doing drugs and getting high, and was looking for an escape that way. And then in my 20s, decided to stop doing drugs, but never really did address the underlying situations, which was the abuse and the dysfunction, and never did allow myself to say, okay, I've been hurt, I've been wounded, and that's that emotional denial. That's that, okay, I'm all right, I'm fine, and always saying that, and all the way through until my 30s, realizing that I was not okay. I knew that I wasn't okay, but it was just this lie I was telling myself in order to make it, in order to get through this stuff. And it's hard. It's extremely hard, because at some point that stuff it will come out, and that's basically, throughout, I've had a few times in my lifetime where, I realized that stuff needed to come out, but I wasn't sure how I could ever do it, how I could ever allow it to come out, because it was it was so painful, you know what I mean? And so I kept kind of stuffing it down, until 4 years ago, when I said, okay, that's it, enough is enough, and allowed myself to start getting, just allow myself to heal, start getting well, and start feeling differently about things, right? So he says, we grew up with the messages like children should be seen and not heard, big boys don't cry, and little ladies don't get angry. It is not okay to be angry at someone you love, especially your parents. This is messages that we grew up maybe hearing, that God loves you but will send you to burn in hell forever if you touch your shameful private parts. Don't make noise or run in or in any way be a normal child. Do not make mistakes or do anything wrong, etc., etc. Growing up with these messages that so often, children have to grow up hearing all these very, dysfunctional things from parents, who really can't cope themselves, or some caregiver that's looking after the child. These people are all just really ill, sick people that are trying to raise a family, right? And it's the majority, it's the majority, I'd like to think. I mean, I really do. I think that there's a few people that have got a handle on parenting, and I don't know how they got it or where they got it from, but they seem to have the ability to raise a child that most of us would think would be properly, without hurting the child and warping the child, you know what I mean? But there's a very few, because most people are so twisted in their thinking, that they just pass it on to their children. He says, we were born into the middle of a war where our sense of self was battered and fractured and broken into pieces. And we grew up in the middle of battlefields where our beings were discounted, our perceptions invalidated, and our feelings ignored and nullified. And it's just, that's the issue. I mean, I talk about that a lot. As a child, most of us weren't allowed, especially if you've been abused, to have feelings, to stand up for yourself and say, look, that hurt me, or you hurt me, or, what you're doing is hurting me. You know what I mean? I mean, once in a while I'd throw that at my parents, when I was young, but I knew that the minute I opened my mouth I'd be in trouble, because my mother did not want to hear anything from me. You know what I mean? Like, she didn't want to see me. So, if I stuck up for myself and stuck up for for myself in a way that seemed like I was talking back to her, she would just be like, I don't want to hear anything from you, and you're going to shut your mouth. You know what I mean? And if you don't shut your mouth, I'm going to take your head off. And she wouldn't say it like that, She'd be like, I'm going to take your goddamn head off, and I'll kill you. And she was very violent and very vicious, and didn't want to hear, what I had to say about the fact that I was hurting and I was in a sad, bad place. You know what I mean? Because of her, but not only because of her. Because of the situation between her and my dad, and the way my dad was treating everyone, and it was horrible. And we weren't allowed to have feelings or emotions on that. I talk about that quite a bit, and have mentioned it before on a few shows before, where I was talking about the fact that my parents would just have had a big fight, and some of us would have gotten involved in it because we were in the home, and so, even maybe possibly been beaten, right? And my mother we'd be going over to dinner to somebody's house, that evening. My mom would be like, okay, everybody's going to straighten up. This is what we would do. Like, she would control the whole thing in that way. She'd be like, okay, everybody's going to straighten up, and you're all going to put a smile on your face, and you're not going to say one word about anything, that goes on in this house. And you're going to sit there and behave yourself, and you're going to pretend that everything is great. So, I mean, I had been laying on the floor from a beating, crying my eyes out, and, bawling my face off. And she's telling me, I'm going to smile. You're going to smile and you're going to straighten up. My mother was quite often beating me before we went to somebody's house. I don't know why, but it was the stress of the whole thing. And I'd have to show up over there, kind of half trashed, and smiling. You know what I mean? So I wasn't allowed to feel what I needed to feel. You know what I mean? And I think that that's the case with every abused child. I would think it would be all abused children, is having to get up and go and put that smile on your face and face the world, And my sister and I talk about it sometimes, that we don't talk anymore because I kind of cut everybody off last fall, but when we were talking, we would talk about stuff like this, and we said it was really quite a nightmare to have to go through the nights and that my parents would be fighting all night and nobody got any sleep. You know what I mean? Because there's no way you can sleep with two adults who are screaming at each other viciously, verbally cutting each other down and cursing and throwing things around and breaking things. You're not going to sleep very well in that environment, and somebody's going to get hurt, and that's all there is to it. So it is pretty violent, pretty vicious, and try to sleep, and there's no way you can sleep. So you get up the next morning, to go to school, because we had to go to school. My mother was not going to let us stay home from school. It was probably better that we did go to school, but it was hard because all night having to listen to all that and the craziness of it, and the threat of that, something could happen and spill over to me. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it did, and that's the whole issue. My parents would, especially my dad, would be talking about killing the whole family and while we slept and stuff like that, and so. Waking up in the next morning and getting ready for school and stuff, and having to leave and go to school and face these kids in this classroom and these teachers, and knowing just what had transpired the night before, and that was just how we lived. We lived our whole life like that, and we lived, especially as young, growing up as young children in that environment, was just bizarre. You know what I mean? My sister and I talk about it a lot because we really, we were so twisted and dysfunctional in our thinking and whatnot, and then we'd have to go to school and sit there and try to behave and fit in with this group of people. My sister and I were not in the same grade, 5 years older than me. So when I was in elementary, she by the time I hit like the 3rd or 4th grade, she was already in junior high, so we weren't in the same schools even. But we'd have to leave about the same time to go to school, and we talked about the fact that we'd be sitting on the bus or we'd be walking to school, just totally out of it, you know what I mean? Just wiped out from the night before and just exhausted, because this wasn't just one night a week. I mean, we're talking like this could be every night of the week for weeks, if my parents were in a mode of complete destructive, behaviors, trying to kill each other. It wouldn't be like a one-time thing every 6 months. I mean, we're talking, it was very, very dysfunctional, highly dysfunctional. And, then coming home from school, sitting in school all day wondering what's going to be happening at home. That was my big thing all the way even through high school. I was quite concerned that somebody in my home would get killed, and, probably my mother. And I kind of thought, one day they're going to tell me that my mother's dead. Somebody's going to phone the school, and somebody's going to come and get me, like one of my older siblings. And they're going to tell me that somebody's dead, and it'll probably be it'll be either my mother or one of my brothers. This was just something that would go through my head from this, And in the meantime, trying to behave normally and trying to act normal around kids. You know what I mean? I wasn't a kid, so I didn't know how to act like a kid. I really didn't know how to fit in. You know what I mean? It's really bizarre, And I kind of did really stay to myself most of the time, and then wondering on the way home from school what you're walking into. That was always a big issue too. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I did go home after school most of the time. Excuse me, check in and see what was happening. And especially as a young child, of course, I went home after school, and you just coming up to the steps. I just remember like thinking, oh my God, like what am I walking into? Just a fear of the unknown. You know what I mean? Like, is somebody going to be hurt? Somebody's going to be dead? Somebody's going to beat me? Somebody's going to curse me. Then when I got older to be a teenager, I was walking in thinking, oh my God, somebody's going to throw me out. Come in the house and my mom will be telling me I got to get out, and I'm going to foster care, and she didn't want me and she hates my guts, and or throw in a beating for good measure there. You know what I mean? It was hard. It was incredibly hard because it went on year after year after year. And I think that's where, in order to survive, you just keep stuffing that stuff down. You just keep stuffing it down, and before you know it, you end up like a war vet, with this delayed stress syndrome. So it's very much like that, you know what I mean? The bombs going off, and you don't know when they're going to go off, and people getting hurt around you that you love. It's the same thing as war veterans, these guys and women now, in the military, seeing their comrades fall, right next to them, and having to continue to go to save their own lives in order to get the mission done. It's the same thing as in the families, in this family, dysfunctional, abusive family situation. The job's got to get done. You have to keep going, so you keep getting up. So my mom would keep, getting up and keep buying the groceries and keep, you know, doing the laundry. But in the meantime, the whole thing was just a big dysfunctional mess. You know what I mean? And you know, and she was at her wit's end as well. I mean, it was no peace for her, right? And so there was no peace for us, right? And so it was pretty harsh to have to grow up like that. But I know so many people probably do. You know, so many people do. I knew so many people growing up who were living in these types of homes, you know, and I wasn't really alone in that. I had lots of friends who were growing up in these dysfunctional type homes, you know what I mean? Some were worse than mine. And I was just, you just start to look around and you think, "Oh my God," you know what I mean? Like, even, that was just my life, you know what I mean? Of course I didn't like it, and who would want to grow up like that, you know what I mean? I had a hard time fitting in with kids, you know, like my own age, or even, it didn't matter whether they were older or younger. I didn't know how to relate to them, you know what I mean? Because I was the youngest born, and I was just left most of the time, you know, in the house, on the couch, and had to be quiet because I had to be very, you had to be careful in my house what you were doing. You couldn't just be yourself. You know, I couldn't just go and play and make noise and enjoy myself as a child, because there was a possibility that I'd be hurt, you know what I mean? And that's the thing, I was always just sitting very kind of doing my own thing, you know what I mean, whether it was just coloring or playing with a few dolls or whatever, and just waiting for something to happen, because that's the bomb that's going to drop, and you never know when it's going to drop, right? So I was always on edge, anxious child, and nervous, had a lot of nervous tics. I talk about that a lot. And had a lot of emotional problems, right? So, and then I was expected to be able to pull it together, and that always used to bother me, because I was like, look, you people are the ones causing me to behave this way, you're you people. And I used to start to complain, especially when I got to be an older, like a young teen, like around 12, 13, started to actually tell my parents in a way, look what you've done to me, and you expect me to be able to pull it together, And they didn't want to hear that from me. That's why my mother started telling me stuff like, I'm throwing you out of the house. You are out. And she'd push me out. She'd slam the door behind me. She'd be like, get out, and she'd be screaming at me, and you're going to foster care, and I hate you. And, and I was just, because I was actually in her face saying, look what you've done to me. And, look what this has done to me. And really it was just a cry for help. But there was no help in that home, you know what I mean? Like, she was not going to say, oh my God, look what we have done to you, oh my God. And I in doing so, because I was probably the only child that actually really did that, besides a couple of my brothers. A couple of my brothers used to talk to my parents like that, and I think that's where I kind of got that from. But, I really didn't care. I was like, I don't care what they do to me. They need to hear the truth, And by the time I was about, I'd say 15, 16, I started telling them like it was. And, of course, it did get me some beatings for sure, because my dad didn't want to hear that. Neither did my mom. And they were still violent towards me, even though they were like, I don't know how they were old by then, you know what I mean? But they were still able to beat the shit out of me. And, they didn't want to hear what I had to say. And I started telling them like it was. I was like, you people have trashed us, you know what I mean? And where was the love, man? Where was the care? Where was the concern, And I started throwing it in their face, and of course I'd get it thrown back in my face, usually with a fist. But the thing is I didn't care. I was like, you know what? I don't care. Go ahead and kill me. I don't care. Years ago I had been telling them to kill me. I was like, you go ahead, you do what you're gonna do, but I'm gonna bloody say what I gotta say. And that's pretty harsh, right? I started to kind of, after a while, especially in my 20s, just let that go and stuff it down, because I was really still trying to get some sort of restitution with my mother, and was still sticking around in that situation. And so, that whole, having that stuff just stuffed down like that, eventually, it will come back to like they say, to haunt you, and that's what it did, completely, because part of me wanted to think that I was okay, and part of me wanted to be like that little kid who rolled with the punches, and say, oh, no, I'm fine, I can deal with this, I can handle this. Part of me still is like that. That's why I don't go get help when I need help. That's why I don't allow myself to go get medical attention when I need medical attention, because it's like, no, I can take this, I'm okay, I'm all right, and it's just, that's from the years of having to do that. From having to just roll with it and go with it, with whatever was dished out, and say, no, I'm going to be okay, even though this is really destroying me. I'm gonna basically lie to myself in order to make it through the day, and that's that whole denial thing. That's that whole not allowing ourselves to be true to ourselves and say, no, this abuse is killing me, and it is destroying me. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's very, very hard on children, and I know, so many people have gone through this, and it's, at some point we do have to face it. And I know, like 4 years ago, when I was sitting on the couch ready to self-injure, I had a screwdriver in my hand, and it was an old, kind of not rusty, but it was disgusting, old screwdriver, and I was going to rip my arms to shreds. I mean, I was going to tear my skin and tear my flesh and cause serious damage. And I really wanted to just rip myself up. That's how much pain I was in. I was like, my heart is hurting so bad that if I don't do this, the world needs to see my pain. That's where I was sitting out on the couch 4 years ago, thinking, someone's got to see this. That was my cry for help. I mean, it was like, of course nobody was in the room with me. I was in my own apartment on my own, but that was my cry to, I don't know, to God, to myself, to the world, to say, look, I need help, man. So instead of running on the street doing that, I mean, I was just sitting in my apartment. I had been doing that, for years off and on. And I was thinking, I want to rip myself to shreds. I'm just going to gouge myself, and I'm going to just allow myself to show this pain, you know what I mean, for people to see what my parents did to me. And then as I was sitting there, of course I was also planning my suicide, thinking I can't deal with this anymore. I can't be in this pain anymore. How long am I going to have to suffer this? At the age of 41, I'm like, how many years do I have to suffer this abuse? You know what I mean? From this pain and this anguish and this suffering. You know what I mean? And something just popped into my head, and I know it was God. And something popped into my head and said to me, if you do this, no one will care. No one will care, because no one can care. They cannot do that for you. You know what I mean? And what was a sad and tragic reality is that nobody does care. And the thing is that you might find somebody who wants to care and who can do so much for you, but ultimately it is up to us. You know what I mean? Because how can I expect somebody else to take away that pain? They can't do it. You know what I mean? But I was sitting there thinking, the world can take away my pain. That's how desperate I was. That's how desperate my brother was when he killed himself at the age of 33. You know what I mean? That's how desperate my other brother was, who died of a drug overdose at the age of 37 in a shelter all by himself. That the world can take away our pain, when the world can't do that for us, And something was just sitting there, something inside of me, and a little voice was saying, if you do this, all you're going to do is allow your parents to win this fight, because no one is going to care. You're going to end up in the grave, and you know that no one's going to care. Your family isn't going to care. The remaining members of your family, your sister, your brother, your dad, they are not going to care. They're going to cry a few tears, and they're going to say, she was just like the brothers. She was a loser. She was a drug addict. She was a loser. And they're not going to say, look at her. Look what her parents, look what we did to her. Look what we caused her, because that's what they won't even admit that with my brothers, that the pain that was involved, that the pain and the shame and the horror and the tragedy and the trauma that my brothers went through, eventually took their lives because they would not allow themselves to get help. So that little voice was talking to me very seriously and saying, if you do this, no one's going to care, and then you'll have let your parents win this fight. And you will be the loser, because you will have let your parents kill you after all these years of being able to say, I can roll with it, I can do this. You're going to give up. I got mad at myself, and I was like, that's it. I will never, ever, ever do that again. And I will never, ever say that again. I will never feel that again. That is it. I made a huge commitment to myself, and, it was a commitment to myself. And, I'm pretty stubborn, so I'm pretty good about commitments. Once I actually make the commitment, then it's done. And so, I thought, no, wait, I'm going to win this fight. I'm going to come out on top here. And in order to do that, I had to make some huge changes. And these changes have taken me as long as they've taken me. It's taken me these 4 years to do what I've done. So we'll have to continue on with this tomorrow. But thanks, everybody, for being here. I have Gypsy Witch here with me, my good friend Gypsy Witch. Thanks so much for being here, and the nice chats we had yesterday, just day before, just awesome. And I love you, dear. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. I appreciate you all being here and listening and tuning into my shows. And if you can't cope, man, you make sure that you get some help. Allow yourself to get some help. Like I said, if I can't do this, I'm going to get a counselor. I'll get a therapist. I'll call a crisis line. I refuse to let my parents win this fight, and I refuse to allow this abuse to kill me. I can do this, and I realized that 4 years ago that it is going to have to be me to do it. It is going to have to be us. We have to be the ones to do it. So make sure, if you're having a hard time and you're just thinking, I can't do this, you get some help. I don't care what kind of help it is, group support, online group support, talking to a friend, crisis line, whatever you have to do, but you make sure you get some help and you stick it out and you do not ever give up. Not ever, not ever, not ever. We deserve to have a good life, and I keep saying this on all my shows, but it's so important to me to say this because that's why I'm doing these shows, really. And it's also for me to reinforce, the fact that no, we can't give up. And there's going to be bad days. That's a fact. But there's also these other times that we can learn to appreciate, and eventually we can start seeing some good days. So I have so many more good days than I used to. So I used to have a lot more bad days than good days. Now I have a whole lot more good days than bad days. And that's because I'm allowing myself to change the way I feel, the way I think. And that's me doing that. I gave myself permission to feel differently. I gave myself permission to love myself. And I gave myself permission to hold my head high and to not cower in the corner anymore. You know what I mean? So that's the thing. We have to do this for ourselves. You make sure you stick around. And I hope that you have a great day, everybody. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll be back on tomorrow, same time, same place, 6 a.m. And we'll just pick up where we left off here. But this is awesome stuff from Joy to You and Me, from Robert Burney. That's www.joy2, the number 2, MEU.com. Have a great day, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.